A lot of talk about the expectations for the Vikings this year, but are they better or worse than the roster that went 14-3 last year? Let's talk about it on Locked On Vikings.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. Hashtag everydayers. I appreciate you all so very much. Today on the show, I want to start real quick with a programming update about the Everyman series. It is becoming clear to me that we will not get to Everyman in the Everyman series, and the title of the Everyman series will probably not stay the same. It is a choice that I am making for no other reason than it's just my creative gut is telling me to not force it. They're not the most popular episodes, which is never a thing I had a problem with. Although if you are the kind of person listening to this episode, but not to the Everyman series episode, you should go check out the YouTube playlist that I made for it, or just click around to previous Locked On Vikings episodes. There's a great one about Jonathan Allen, a great one about Isaiah Rodgers. Those are just the recent ones. There's some excellent ones. But I think I owe it to you, the listener, to bring you something good instead of something comprehensive. I think that's probably a better priority. So I'm going to sort of change the way that goes down and change that for the future. I mean, has always been a bit of a moving target format-wise. It's been a little different every year, and maybe that's beautiful. But I also wanted to make sure that I had plenty of time to preview the Vikings, to discuss the sort of generic, preview topics that are the kinds of things that we're thinking about in the summer, such as, did the Vikings actually get better this offseason? Here is the thing. We're going to do this position by position because I think trying to boil the whole team down into one thing is tough. But there are some interesting debates to be had here. For last year, what they got out of Sam Darnold. Will J.J. McCarthy live up to that? Are the corners better or worse than they were last year? Or, the defensive line, we could argue, got better. The offensive line maybe got better, but there's like question marks to health and youth and all that. So we'll go through all of that. But the first kind of thought that I have is, man, the expectation's probably going to be really high because last year's roster performed really, really well. Not only did the team go 14-3, but they had a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense for the first time in years and years. And I don't think you're being crazy if you go, okay, well, that won't happen again. It's just hard to repeat that unless you are one of the elite units of the league, a team like the Patriots of old. And I don't even know if there is a team in this league that you can comfortably say will be top 10 on both offense and defense year after year. There are teams with great quarterbacks that are going to be in it every year, like the Chiefs and the Bills. But I think of maybe the Ravens, the Eagles, that are going to be top 10 on one side of the ball, top 10 on the other side of the ball, and it's going to sustain. It's a really hard thing to do, but everybody's going to try. So let's start with right at the top with the most interesting question. Will J.J. McCarthy be better than Sam Darnold was in 2024? This is a divergence between, I think, the question in its more pure form, its more natural form, is, were the Vikings correct to move on from Sam Darnold and to J.J. McCarthy? That's not what I'm asking here. I think that they were unambiguously correct to do that. I think it's actually probably crazy to say that they weren't correct to do that. They agonized over it. They really had some decisions over it. They thought about Sam Darnold in a serious way, in a way that they never really considered, say, Aaron Rodgers, which, by the way, Adam Schefter had that on his podcast recently, that it was never really serious with Aaron Rodgers, which, again, I'm looking at a lot of people who definitely knew what was going on and how they talked about it, and I'm raising one singular sassy eyebrow at them. But it's so funny how once there's no longer millions of dollars in contract on the line, how suddenly everything feels a lot more true. The truth and what it is changes a lot before the fact and after the fact. And I'm just maybe thinking that the media entities of sports and maybe beyond don't have your best interests at heart. But anyways, back to J.J. McCarthy. Letting go of Sam Darnold was hard for the Vikings. And McCarthy embracing him for the future is, I think, a much bigger part of that than whether or not 2024 quarterbacking will be better than 2025 quarterbacking. I think it's going to be really hard to beat that. I don't expect 2025's quarterbacking to be better than 2024's quarterbacking. It's J.J. McCarthy's first year. I think they made the right choice long term, and I think short term it's going to dip a little bit. But the long term of Sam Darnold that it was attached to, I think, dips a lot more. So they made the right choice, and it's just hard to go 14-3 twice in a row. So I think in the most important position, I feel fairly comfortable saying, no, they didn't get better. The room itself, I don't think got better. I don't know if I prefer Sam Howell to Nick Mullins. I would say that what Sam Darnold did last year will be extraordinarily difficult to replicate for J.J. McCarthy, so much so that I think it's unfair to expect that. And it's naive to pretend that the decision is about that, which is what will happen. People will look and say, at week 8 last year, Sam Darnold had this many yards and this many touchdowns and this many interceptions. And here's what J.J. McCarthy had. And that's going to be how they talk about it. And that's going to be a really bad faith way to do it. And I'm going to be like, don't listen to that. I'm going to say it then, and I'm going to say it now. Don't listen to stuff like that. That decision wasn't about solely 2025. It was about setting up a 3-year window, 25, 26, 27, where you've got the rookie QB contract and you can, sign basically every important player on the Vikings is now signed through 2027, with the exception of a few situations like Brian O'Neill and Josh Metellus that are underway. And by the time we actually play meaningful football, those might be resolved too. I'm being very careful here because while I'm going to say, no, they didn't get better, the Vikings got worse at quarterback. That's okay for a whole bunch of really, really important reasons. And with any luck, the dip won't be low enough to hold the Vikings back in 25. And I think the way the Vikings have conducted themselves transactionally, the way that they've put their rosters together, it is absolutely well within everybody's prerogative to look at them and say, put up or shut up, you better make a deep playoff run. Because this is the build, as it is. If this team, as it is constructed, is like mid, then we have a pretty big problem that we're locked into it for 3 or 4 years. This is what it is. If it's just okay, you better hope that it was because of injuries or something that can sort of resolve itself passively over the offseason. Because if it's, well, I guess we need to go spend $35 million in a bunch of draft picks and, get a better room for this one or that one, it's going to be a lot harder to accomplish that in the next couple of years than it was this year, where the Vikings could throw around money like they bought Bitcoin in 2009. That's just quarterback, though. There's a lot more to this roster, and whether or not you got better at worse at certain positions becomes a really interesting debate pretty quick at like all of them. Let's quickly run over a couple of easier ones. Tight end. I would say no, they got worse, but the way in which they got worse, well, I guess it depends on how we're counting TJ Hawkinson last year, because you get the whole year of TJ Hawkinson, ostensibly, instead of half a year, which is going to outweigh anything else. All I was saying is, I think, throwing in a rookie or an undrafted free agent instead of Johnny Munt probably gets worse, and that was the only material difference. But not if you get 8 games of TJ Hawkinson, you probably get better there. And that's like a way more practical impact, so I should go with that. We're coming up with the format on the fly. So yes, tight end got better. I think running back got better in a pretty real way. You get Aaron Jones again, call that a wash. Maybe he'll get a little older. Maybe he's slightly worse. But I think the difference between Jordan Mason and then relying on like a Ty Chandler, Cam Akers sort of switcheroo thing is I would much rather have Jordan Mason. Big fan of Jordan Mason and the signing or the trade there. I think the value was right, but I'm just excited to have him on the team. I think they got better there. So there's a couple of quick ones, but I think once you get to, I guess we can quickly do wide receiver as well. Again, it's the same group of people more or less. You're probably losing 3 games of Jordan Addison, so I guess say they got worse. But really, this is probably going to be determined more by how we feel about Ty Felton and Rondale Moore versus how we felt about like Trent Sherfield and Brandon Powell, and what you're going to get out of a guy like Rondale Moore, or is Tim Jones going to get minutes? Like, it depends on a lot of that depth stuff, which is all very, very small potatoes. And it feels like all of that stuff is probably less valuable than what losing 3 games of Jordan Addison is going to be. So probably going to say got worse there, but not by much. So we're 2-2, I guess, going into the trenches. And then, of course, we'll talk about the defense as well. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever wished that managing your money felt easier? There's so many stressful things about it, from managing your budget to thinking about it every time you're going to eat out or go online shopping or trying to budget out a trip or something like that. Whatever it is, Monarch Money can put you in the driver's seat. If you're trying to plan a big purchase or just try to build better habits, Monarch Money can help you. And it's so much more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you can also build wealth. You can look at specific categories like takeout or certain subscriptions you might have forgot about that added up more than you expected. And you can replace a whole bunch of piecemeal financial apps you might already have for investments, portfolios, joint accounts, and budgeting itself, and jam them all into one easy, convenient place. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. Moving right along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Did the Vikings actually get better this offseason? Let's focus on the trenches. I think you could make a really, really tortured argument that the Vikings got worse on the O-line, but I don't think you'd be doing something very smart. I think this is maybe the most exciting, well, maybe the D-line is, but the most exciting thing about the Vikings is the projected improvements of the O-line. And I think it's the thing that the national media is overlooking the most. Of course it is. It's always O-line. Come on. But when you look at the way the Vikings went out last year, 9 sacks in the wild card game, that taste in your mouth really, really, you still felt it in March when they went out and got Ryan Kelly and Will Fries, and now we're getting Darisaw back, and then their first round pick in, a month later is on the line. That's a lot of stuff to try to do better than that. Even if the rookie isn't better than Blake Brandel, which I hope he is. I think if I had gun to my head, I had to guess, I would say, yeah, he will be, but you can't guarantee that. He's a rookie. Getting a full season, ostensibly, of Christian Darisaw, replacing Ryan Kelly or replacing Garrett Bradbury with Ryan Kelly is an upgrade. I wrote out that whole argument at wide left, but I don't think I'm going to have to work too hard to convince most of you of that. And then Will Fries over Ed Ingram is a huge improvement to me. So that's four for four getting better at positions, either by just getting guys back healthy or hopefully improving on guys. At least to me, there's some that are murkier than others, but the problem is going to be health, right? If I would be, I think, naive to project that I'm going to get, nobody ever gets 17 games of all 5 starters on their O-line. That rarely ever happens. Somebody always gets hurt, whether it's a concussion and they miss a game, or there's a position battle, someone's getting benched and rotating out and that ruins it. Very rare do you get the starting 5 combo all year. Most teams will go through 2 or 3 combinations on average, and then sometimes you have a year like the 2016 Vikings where you go through 17 combinations and it's crazy. Somewhere in there, right? But the Vikings have exposed themselves to more injury risk than other teams. Will Fries coming off that broken leg, he's still not back. That's one that's a lot less likely to crop back up the way that bone fractures tend to behave on an NFL football field versus the soft tissue injuries, of which Ryan Kelly has a lot. You've got Darisaw coming back off an ACL. And as a lot of people, I get, maybe I'm overreacting to YouTube comments here a little bit, because it's the people who comment on YouTube is a very small minority, but they are who I hear from readily. So if you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment on things. And if you miss me on Twitter and you want to still get at me, leave a YouTube comment. I'll see it. Or just check me out on Blue Sky. I'm right there. Same thing. The injuries that Ryan Kelly has incurred over his lifespan or over his career have a greater risk of cropping back up. You have a greater risk of needing to turn to your backup center. So I'm curious to see who that answer is for the Vikings. And with Darisaw, Like there is, I guess a simmering frustration with him missing a lot of games, which I didn't even really figure out because they were such different situations all the time. He came in with a core injury and he missed a little bit of camp. No, he missed a couple of weeks with that his rookie year, but it was his rookie year anyways. He rotated to start. Like it took him a little bit to kind of ramp up, but he was a full-time starter by the end of his rookie year. So it's hard for me to be really upset about that, but some of you have decided to be. And he got a concussion in 2022. What are you going to do about that? And then he tears his ACL, but it's not like he had a weak knee, man. Dude like rolled up on it. So I think if you're mad about Christian Darrisaw being angered, I think you're being injured. I think your lizard brain is just getting angry at a pattern that you see. But I think you should probably think a little bit harder about those injuries, their nature, and how likely they each are to repeat themselves, which is how we have to look at injuries. A broken leg doesn't repeat itself so much. A torn ACL and MCL does carry some future risk of injury. So we have to still put that aside. But to call Christian Darrisaw injury prone, I think anybody who does that should legally be required to step into an octagon with him, and everybody is just going to close their eyes and let whatever happens happen. I think that's probably the just way to go about that. I get really, really, really mad when people start calling football players soft because they like couldn't play through their torn MCL. You try it, buddy. But with that said, I'm dwelling here on the offensive line because it's exciting to talk about how much better it got. Strong, yes. D-line wise, also strong, yes. You've got the same principal three edge rushers. I'm saying three because that's the way Brian Flores has described it. Three starters: Van Ginkel, Grenard, and Dallas Turner, hopefully taking another step forward. But even if he doesn't, you got the two Pro Bowls, and it's the same group of people, right? Hard to see them regressing. It's the interior that's very exciting, right? I loved Jonathan Bullard last year. Great dude, had a lot of fun, but you never got anything out of the pass. You replace him with Jonathan Allen, and suddenly you got juice in the pass rush. And then, I mean, Jerry Tillery had his moments, and I think for what he was being paid, he did fine. But like, I was never really comfortable if the game was going to come down to a run his way. And that might still be the case with Javon Hargrave, but like, unambiguously, that's an improvement. Hargrave over Tillery, I am taking that 100 million thousand times. A little more expensive, but I think they're getting what they paid for there. It's pretty easy to make that assessment. And depth-wise, you basically haven't changed anything. You did lose Patrick Jones without really replacing him. I think you're just expecting a Gabe Murphy or other undrafted free agent, second year or rookie player to just sort of step up. We'll see how that goes. But you also have Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. Maybe he takes over that role. But I think what he really does is add pressure to an already super stacked defensive tackle depth. I think that last year, the Vikings' interior defensive line and not getting pressure from it was a huge issue. And that was mostly on the starters, being Bullard and Tillery, not really being useful in the pass, and Harrison Phillips too, not really being useful in the pass rush, other than pushing the pocket, hoping the edge rushers got home. And so teams could chip the edge rushers and, by and large, get away with a 3-second pocket. And if they could get the ball out quick, they could find something against high blitz coverages. That was really easy for teams like the Ryans and Lambs. I'm not fixing it. The hopeful result here is that not necessarily that like Jonathan Allen's going to sack Jared Goff personally a whole bunch of times, but rather the threat of that is going to demand more pass blocking resources, and you won't be able to constantly chip Jonathan Grenard, Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner if it comes to that. And hopefully everybody's going to have to win a little bit more straight up. That will hopefully lead to a little bit longer time in the pocket. And if you hold the ball against a Brian Flores defense, that's when all the good things start happening for the Vikings. I think that's what we're going for here. So again, very much unambiguous. Yes, the trenches got better on both sides. I think they got better by a lot. And it's by far the thing, JJ McCarthy notwithstanding, that I'm most excited to watch this year. The rest of the defense, though, some interesting questions to grapple with, and maybe where some of the concerns pop up. That'll be next. I don't know if I have the games like tallied up right, but it sure feels like linebacker was the most injury damaged position last year. in terms of like in-season injuries, I might be forgetting something really big. Maybe if you kind of like JJ McCarthy himself, but like you had Josh Metellus playing Will linebacker in like 10 games. That's not how we drew that up. So hopefully just by virtue of getting healthier, you can kind of say the linebacker group got better. But this is another one where I say, there's a lot of risk of those things cropping back up. Neck injuries, soft tissue injuries, those linger, those come back. Those are the kinds of injuries that are like a concern to reappear. So let's call those guys a wash. Let's just not try to speculate on it. Let's say that having Blake Cashman and Ivan Pace is the same as having Blake Cashman and Ivan Pace. Shouldn't be too hard of a pill to swallow. So it comes down to the depth for linebacker, for inside linebacker. The Eric Wilson versus Kamu Grugier-Hill debate is probably not one that's going to get a lot of press, nor is it one we have to spend a ton of time on. Brian Asamoah and Kobe King adding to that, maybe kicking Asamoah out. By nature of its competition, you kind of say, well, it has to get better because it's either the same dude at linebacker 4 or a dude that's better. And then it just comes down to if you think that Eric Wilson is like worse than Kamu Grugier-Hill by a substantial amount. And I do think Eric Wilson is worse than Kamu Grugier-Hill. I think I would have rather kept Kamu Grugier-Hill. But like most of my perception of Eric Wilson at this point is as a starter for Green Bay where things were bad. So as a backup that only needs to come in for spot duty and special teams like Kamu Grugier-Hill was, it's not going to take a lot for him to overturn that for me. So I'm going to say just by the virtue of there being a little bit more serious competition, I'm going to say better, but it's probably about the same. It seems like you could quibble one way or another, but it's probably just a tie. And that's probably the like more reasonable route to go. Really, the secondary is where the intrigue is. Are the corners better is the one I probably have to think the hardest about. Shaq Griffin, who, by the way, goes to Seattle, so he's not coming back. Not that anyone was projecting that he was. And Stephon Gilmore, who could still return, and at this point I would welcome it, even though I would be a little bit unenthused about, running back a cornerback group that a lot of people are mad at me about this take, but you cannot deny that they got hidden. That the Vikings called a lot of cover 2, a lot of, quarters make them, just chill by the sideline. Basically couldn't do man coverage until the very back half of the year, and then they got smoked by the Lions doing that. They got smoked by the Rams on a Thursday night, getting their defense kind of compressed in the middle by play action and stuff, and then just like attacking on the outside. Cooper Kupp cooked, and Puka Nacua cooked those guys. Some of the worst moments of the season were because the corners either directly were getting beat or a lack of faith in them was causing too much to be put on other members of the team. And so to just bring the same guy back and like some other young unprovens, it would be whelming to say the most. But if you just go like guy for guy, right? So you have Byron Murphy for Byron Murphy, cancel that out. You have, let's say, Stephon Gilmore for Isaiah Rodgers. Will Isaiah Rodgers be better than Stephon Gilmore? That's a really hard question to answer. And I thought Gilmore did fine last year. Will Isaiah Rodgers do fine again? I genuinely have I have a hard time understanding at all what to expect from him. I know he's going to be CB2. That was made pretty clear to us in OTAs, that Isaiah Rodgers is like the guy. And then it's more about like Jeff Okudah, who's higher on the depth chart than I thought, and Mekhi Blackmon like competing for kind of other snaps. So you kind of have Shaquille Griffin or those two guys, whichever wins of those two guys. And man, it's like a bunch of question marks. I'll put it this way, from the most like actionable and practical standpoint. It's really hard for me to say that this cornerback group got better enough for me not to project it as an issue, as the same issue. The Vikings are not going to let these guys man up on Amon-Ra St. Brown and Matthew Golden, if he's anything, and Rome Odunze. They're not going to man up on A.J. Brown and Jamar Chase when those guys come to town. You are not going to do that and expect success. You're going to have to zone all the time. And a team like the Bengals or a team like the Lions that understands how to attack a zone is going to put the Vikings in a Sophie's choice. You either have to take a horrific matchup of a really good wide receiver on one of the easiest cornerback matchups he's going to have all year, or you let a really good quarterback and coach combo pick apart your zone. What do you do? It's a difficult question to answer. They'll come up with some kind of plan. We'll see what it is. Sometimes things work. Sometimes they make it happen. Sometimes they don't. But just by virtue of not having like that alpha dog corner that you can just say, hey, go keep up. Go. Maybe we'll even give you a little help, but go keep up. I don't know. It just is not exciting to me. And the best corner in the room being Byron Murphy, who they want to play at slot and do like zone stuff and blitz sometimes. And like they want to use him as like a piece, not just, okay, go erase someone. That's not his game. And it would be stupid to ask him to make that his game. It's at least as rough as it was last year. There's a world where it's better, but I don't see a world where these guys are like a top 10 unit, a top half unit even, a top 16 unit in the league. I don't know. It's really hard to make that argument that that's just what's going to happen. I guess I could see them outperforming my expectations, but I'm pretty inclined to say that a bad cornerback group kind of got worse. A whole bunch of dudes that haven't started before versus guys that have started but maybe are past their prime. I think I'd take the former over the latter, but I would be open to arguments to the contrary, that an unknown is better than a potentially past his prime good player. I guess I'll listen to you, but I don't know. That's sort of seems like we did that twofold. We either have total question mark, a bust in Jeff Okudah, and we're expecting that to be better than guys who we know how to play and just maybe aren't athletically what they were before. And in safety, I think I hold some of the same concerns. I get that they trust Theo Jackson, but you're really going to give... I'm going to have a really hard time buying the counter argument that I hear the most, which is, well, the coaches trusted him, so you should trust him too. I've heard that a lot over the years, okay? I've heard that I should trust the coaches when they draft Chaz Surratt. I've heard that I should trust the coaches when they draft Kellen Mond. Those two things happened within an hour of each other. I've heard that they should trust the coaches in their ability to develop, DJ Wanham into the next Danielle Hunter, like Andre Patterson, who we have all the reason in the world to trust, said would happen, and it did not, like spectacularly. The Vikings have a great O-line tradition. Trust that TJ Clemmings, they're going to make him work. He's a project, he's raw, but put some faith in it. I've heard that a ton of times, and it does work sometimes. Sometimes they see a guy, they really want him, they bring him in, and he's the dude. I would say that happened with Andrew Van Ginkel, but I also liked the Van Ginkel signing because his tape looked good. He had shown some things. I don't know how I feel about like Theo Jackson. There were mistakes when he came out last year when he did get in action. He would screw things up sometimes, and I wouldn't think much of it because he's safety 4 and he's in as a relief because Harrison Smith needs a breather or whatever, twisted his ankle or whatever, so he needs to come out for a couple plays or whatever. Like, it's not, or just because Brian Flores like rotates, but like the expectations for him are so much higher than they ever have been. And that's the case for 3 different principal members, guys I would call starters in this secondary, whichever they end up being, in Isaiah Rodgers, Mekhi Blackman / Okudah, call that a battle, or Theo Jackson. And I think Okudah is the only one who has had the expectation of being a full-time starter before, and he failed phenomenally at that. He's probably the last guy we want to trust there because we know that didn't work in Detroit or Atlanta, or where was he last year? Houston. We know that all that stuff didn't work. So I don't think you can look at cornerback or secondary and convince me that they got better, that Theo Jackson is going to be an improvement on Cam Bynum. If you want to be a homer and you want to say it'll be fine, they know what they're doing, they let him go, they got cheaper, they spent their money elsewhere, this is what funded the thing on the D-line, so therefore it was worth it. Okay, I'll give you that. That's totally fine to me. But those groups aren't better, and they were already a problem. And if anything's going to undo this team this year, I think that one is the overwhelming favorite. But we'll see how it goes. I will talk to you all tomorrow. Get your questions in, okay? Yell at me in the doc, which some of you like to do, in the Twitter Tuesday or the Town Hall Tuesday doc. Old habits. The Town Hall Tuesday doc, which is linked in the show notes. I'll also put it out on Blue Sky on Monday morning, so you can go respond there. Drop a hot take. Drop a question. We'll talk about whatever you want. I'll talk to you all then. And as always, Skol.